because I like analyzing Bukowski, and it's a fun thing to do live on Twitch. Reading, poetry, learning how to do that. Because I'm learning how to analyze poetry too, teaching myself. I think, I'm good at it, I would say, but I think we are in a constant state of personal education, and I really enjoy showing that on stream. And as an example of that, two streams ago, I didn't read Bukowski last stream, sadly, for Charles. I read As the Sparrow, and I didn't know what it meant, so we ended up having to go to YouTube and find some other analyses to reference. And that was a lot of fun, but I learned maybe some things about how I might have been able to take a closer look at that poem and improve my own analysis, which is good. Now, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at Layover, which you can see there's a few marks here. That is because I stared at this poem for about 15 minutes yesterday before slumping over and nearly falling asleep on stream. And that was kind of bad. So, let's see. Settings, I think I can turn up my bitrate, my quality a little bit, since we are not doing anything on other applications. So there's the poem, and I'll read it. This poem was really interesting to me, and then I just fell asleep. So I'm excited to go back to it. Layover. Making love in the sun, in the morning sun, in a hotel room, above the alley where poor men poke for bottles. Making love in the sun, making love by a carpet redder than our blood, making love while the boys sell headlines and Cadillacs, making love by a photograph of Paris, an open pack of Chesterfields, making love while other men, poor fools, work. That moment to this, maybe years in the way they measure, but it's only one sentence back in my mind. There are so many days when living stops and pulls up and sits and waits like a train on the rails. I pass the hotel at 8 and at 5. There are cats in the alleys and bottles and bums, and I look up at the window and think I no longer know where you are. And I walk on and wonder where the living goes when it stops. So, starting off with something I often find helpful. One sec. I need to move some things. My space is getting slightly messy. You go there. You go there. Where are you? You all go there. Okay, I'm back. Something I like to do, which we've talked about on stream, which I think I'm going to do here, is talk about tense and time. So, making love, where poor man, whatever, making love, all of this is sort of just in the same tense, making, but it's not like gerund form, the ing. The process of that verb, It's not we make love, it's the idea of making love. Making love becomes like almost like a noun in a sense. So that moment to this may be years in the way they measure. So that moment, as I see it, is probably talking about that moment, right? About making love. To this, maybe years in the way they measure, but it's only one sentence back in my mind. There are so many days when living stops and pulls up and sits and waits like a train on the rails. I pass the hotel. See, so this is that other sort of present tense. I pass the hotel. So this is like the actual present, and then this is all the past. There are cats in the alleys and bottles and bums. I look up at the window and think, I no longer know where you are. And I walk on and wonder where the living goes when it stops. This is interesting, living here, even though this is in the sort of second section of the poem. Let me put this here. Even though that's in voice, okay. Even though this is in the second section of the poem, it's using the gerund ing, which was just all throughout the first section, right? Which maybe means that this connects back, right? And the living, where the living goes when it stops, right? This is the living. This is making love while others work. This is enjoying life in a hotel, and all of that, right? Like purely like verbal connections. So we're talking about this in a hotel room, and then we pass the hotel, right? So fairly like simple connection there. So we have the idea of making love in this hotel, and then later we're walking, passing at 8 and 5. So this hotel is on the way of his like commute, right? And he passes this hotel every day, and it's the same thing, right? In the alleys, there's the bottles, the bums. It is all the same. It's very clearly saying that this is the same hotel, wants to communicate that. And I look up at the window, and oh, my neck is kind of tense. Looking up the window and thinking, I no longer know where you are. So you, the person with which Bukowski is making love. He was known for his promiscuity. He was married with a kid. He also had many one-night stands, and he was an alcoholic and a smoker, and generally like a pretty not great person. You know, we even have reference, a pack of Chesterfields, I think that's cigarettes. I don't smoke, I've never smoked. Smoked cigarettes, never smoked cigarettes. Smoked weed once. Someday we'll tell that story on stream. It's not good. So we have this alcoholic, this Bukowski, his one-night stand, as he does. And it's interesting because he was a fairly, I guess I wrote this as all to say, he was fairly morally destitute. He was also poor. And we know that, one, because of Wikipedia, also because he talks about it in As the Sparrow. He had nothing to provide for his daughter, both materially and emotionally. And whether or not this is before or after he had the kid doesn't matter. This is him doing not very fatherly things, which happened both before and after the birth of his daughter, as far as I'm aware. Anything I say talking about Bukowski, I'm mostly confident about, unless otherwise specified, but still fairly likely that I would be wrong. I'm not a scholar. I've read now 3 of his poems and watched 2 videos on him. On this poem, in fact. So what's the point? What's the point? And I think the point of this poem is somewhere in the talking about poor fools and working, and then also the section here. Also, of course, the end. Usually the end of the poem is going to have some amount of important conclusion. I mean, maybe I should write an unconcluded poem one of these times on stream. Should I do that after this? Write a poem that tries to not conclude? I mean, I definitely have some, probably, that I've written, but my poems tend to be fairly conclusive, so... So, what is the point of Layover? We also have the title, which is, I don't know, a layover, kind of refer to like a flight, but also, I mean, just the idea of like being somewhere for a short time, waiting, in this case, maybe filling that time with a one-night stand, right? It's a very, artistic thing to do. Have a layover and fill it with a short affair. So, and lay over, if you will. Maybe that's all it means. Just to say that he was laying over at this place with a woman. But regardless, not too important to me, as I see it right now. So, Bukowski is poor. He's also a fool. He knows it. He writes about himself being a fool. I mean, even, honestly, these first 2 poems are an excellent introduction for this poem. This says, I don't believe in myself, and I fail the people around me. And I think that's important context for Layover. Because now that we know that, we can say, yeah, he calls other people poor fools for working while he lives this artistic life, while they are working, he, Bukowski, is not working and being an artist, a poet. You know, that reminds me of like the idea of like La Vie Bohème, the bohemian life. He's getting with women, being poor, writing poetry, obviously being inspired in poetry through these one-night stands, although this is written later, right? And yet, simultaneously, not recommending the life to others, as we see in friendly advice to a lot of young men, and a lot of old men too, while he is poor, and being a pretty bad person. And this is something that one of the videos I watched on the previous poem talked about. That Bukowski writes poems that allow us to judge the speaker. Oftentimes people will write poems talking about something. I talk about my perspective on love. Bukowski is writing poems, in this case a poem on love, making love. And rather than asking us, is this a good way to make love, or is this beautiful, or is this bad, it's asking, underlying, is this person right for thinking this way? Because Bukowski's poems demonstrate such flawed logic, and he so honestly displays it, right? So, that being said, we very much have this contradiction of looking down on others. And I mean, actually, literally, they are above the alley. They are physically above. They are below him for living in the way they do, for living their lives, right? He is living this life up in the hotel room, this glamorous, poetic life, and that puts him above them. And I think that's really interesting. It could be that there was a physical hotel room that was the second floor. Also, that could very well just be an intentional changing of reality, where he wanted to demonstrate that he was above these people. In that moment. And then that moment to this may be years in the way they measure. Again, so the way they measure is temporally, it's weeks, work weeks. But it's only one sentence back in my mind. As to say, this was far away. This is years ago. It's years ago, but it feels close. And I think this makes sense looking at the poem, because Bukowski is living, he lives based on feeling. While other people, the poor men, those who, whereas others live temporally, they live to work, they live to be productive. And really, Bukowski has no interest in these things. Or at least at this time did not, right? And then it's only one sentence back in my mind. Again, it's close. One sentence back. I don't think it's saying one sentence back in my mind, that this is one sentence, but it's one sentence back in my mind. As to say, all of this happened a sentence ago. And it's funny because literally it did. Right? This is gorgeous, actually. We have this sentence, right? So we have a sentence, it goes there, that's the period, right? So this is a sentence, and then literally, if we go one sentence back, we are making love while other men work. One sentence back. And that's incredible, because now Bukowski is commenting literally on the structure of the poem while also using that as a metaphor to say that this is recent. And one sentence back, that it's close to him artistically. It's artistically close, it's emotionally close, while temporally it's far away. And there's so many days when living, so again we talked about this, how living, I think, is specifically referring to this and this day. This is living, which is making love, making love, making love, making love. Making love is living. And that maybe makes sense for Bukowski, because that's kind of what he did in his life. Making love is living. And as an artist, making love is making art, making love is making poetry. All of this is life. And he might even, he's very likely referring to a specific woman, but he might also be referring to art. And I think that because now I passed the hotel at 8 and 5. Which is to say, he passes the hotel every day on his work commute. Right? 8 to 5 is a commute. And he is now looking up. He is down on the street. He is not making love, nor is he making art. And he's not living. He is not living. Right? He is below. He has stooped down to the level of those that he criticized for living life. When living stops and pulls up and sits and waits like a train on the rails. Stops waiting like a train. Again, that idea of the commute. And at 5, there are cats in the alleys looking at alleys and bottles and bums, and I look up at the window and think, I no longer know where you are. And I walk on and wonder where the living goes when it stops. Now, when the living stops, when we switch from living to working, where the living goes when it stops, when life becomes work, where does the poetry go? This I understand completely as someone who does art, and I think anyone else who does art of any kind understands this. The more that you work, the more work becomes your life. Obviously, you're losing time to do art, but it's also taxing artistically, where you can still have time to be making art, but working as a way of life becomes antithetical to the way of life of art. Working is antithetical. We can use this. Working is antithetical to art. More so than talking about a woman and love, I think this is what Bukowski is saying. That his life as an artist, as a promiscuous person, as someone living la vie bohème, that's what it is. It's a life. The bohemian life. It's a different life from work. That's what it is. Seems like a fairly, conclusive analysis. So I'd love to know when this poem was born. This poem was written, born. I like that. When was this poem born? Bukowski. Charles Bukowski. Layover. So this poem was written when was Layover written? I love how, so I'm looking on this page and it has like an analysis and it's saying like a bunch of sort of meaningless words. The poem's language is sparse, relying on concrete imagery with simple diction. It effectively captures the sense of loss and longing that follows such an encounter. Also questions the elusive nature of life's passions and quickly fade. Like, that's true. I think that's a good surface level. But that's saying, like, that's looking at what the poem says and rephrasing it. I think to analyze it metaphorically, I don't think he's just talking about love. And that's because of his 8 to 5. It's because of the idea that living has stopped, that this is greater than the life below, that he's now part of the life below, and all of that. I don't know when this poem was written. Layover by Charles Bukowski. Got my shoulder. Let me switch to my face. Okay. When is it written? This is talking about... How do I find when a poem was first published? I get my iPad over here. When was Layover by Bukowski written? Okay, circa 1956 from Pinterest. And okay, 1957, 1956. If we go to Bukowski's life, so he wrote this poem when he was 36. He also wrote this poem the same year when he got married, which is interesting. 57. Is this considered his early writing? Several... Okay. Oh. No, this was after his... This was like during the process of his first divorce. Although... The Void, yes, hello. We're just finishing up analyzing another Bukowski poem. Oh my gosh, I can buy cheap viewers at your link. Oh man, that just really makes me wanna click on your link to buy viewers. Oh no, instead of clicking on it, I accidentally banned you. Dang. My bad. So, I'm trying to figure out when this poem by Bukowski was written. And basically it's right in the middle of his first marriage. They divorced shortly after this poem happened. When he is 24. Okay, and it's probably referring to, quote from Wikipedia, a time that he referred to as a 10-year drunk. These lost years formed the basis for his later semi-autobiographical chronicles. Yeah, so this is talking about his most, like, destitute, drunk, promiscuous point of his life. His most kind of terrible person years. I mean, not really. And then he was working at a pickle factory. So this definitely following his divorce, Bukowski resumed drinking and continued writing poetry. Okay. So he's like working in the factory. Hates his existence as a like 8 to 5 worker doing like that life. And he hates that existence. But when he was making love, being drunk in a hotel room, smoking with women, he felt like he was above them. This is greater. Also, he represents physical proximity. He is above the people in the alleyway. And then, when he reflects on that time as someone who's working, he wonders what happened. Where did that go? And it was during his marriage, during the writing of this poem, that he stopped drinking, that he wasn't writing very much poetry. And that tells me that, yes, this poem is about that he's no longer, like, having affairs in this hotel. But he's really no longer in this marriage. He's no longer satisfied because he's not making art. And not getting drunk out of his mind, a la Charles Bukowski. But, so really what this poem says is working is antithetical to making art. And I would say his opinion is that art and also the sort of suffering alongside it is greater than the life of work. This is a poem where I probably agree with Bukowski. The Void, yes, you only know that you will never know yourself. I mean, yeah. I don't like to say never, but I think I'm fairly confident that I agree with that statement. I think to truly know oneself essentially is like entirely in its fullest extent. Like I know myself maybe relatively well, relative being like literally compared to others, but also relatively poorly, relative to a lot of others. I'd say I'm like in the middle of knowing myself amongst people, but like to know oneself in entirety to me is like sort of like a spiritual enlightenment, probably equivalent to like what the Buddhists call enlightenment. Nor will we never truly know others. Yeah, absolutely. We cannot know others, and we cannot know how others know us. The way others know us will never be the same as we know ourselves, and that's how it be. I know that I will never know myself, nor will we never truly know others. And that's because you have a sort of perceptual barrier. I only understand you, the void yes, through my certain perceptions of you, and that is your chats, and like the one Discord call. Solipsism. I actually like don't know what solipsism like means definitionally. Solipsism. I wonder, the void yes. Quality being very self-centered or selfish. I see. Have you listened to the band Gang of Youths and their album Go Farther in Lightness? I feel like you would enjoy that. It's always one I recommend. So, yeah, Go Farther in Lightness. It's a poem inspired heavily by Camus and I think Kierkegaard. There's a song in there called Fear and Trembling. And yeah, I think Camus and Kierkegaard particularly, it references overtly. There could be others that I just am not familiar with, but really excellent poem. And I'm just reminded because there's a lyric that specifically references solipsism. That's all. I kind of want to write a poem now, talking about those things. Never knowing others, never knowing ourselves. I was also saying that I wanted to write a poem that remains unresolved. Because I was talking about that for some reason before. So if I can use those words as inspiration, I might be willing to write a poem on stream. 2/3 Lotus and the Void, yes. Unless you want. Unless you want to take that poem and write it. Stretch my neck. But regardless, that was Bukowski. Tomorrow or next stream, I might not be streaming tomorrow, or it might be a late stream. We'll be looking at the life of Borodin. Borodin? He was a composer. So that's enough Bukowski for today. Let's write a poem.